This is a long article from the Washington Post. This woman here hugging these kids is a daycare provider in Idaho. And in Idaho, they are very red, very conservative. She even talks about being conservative in this article. And now she is faced with what being conservative does to people like her that are working childcare now that the subsidies that were passed during COVID have run out. So this one is titled, Child Care Gets Little Help in Idaho. A family-run center is buckling. Payday was coming, and the daycare's bank account was dangerously low. So Crystal McFarland again went outside to check TLC for Tot's black mailbox. She hoped to find the payment that one toddler's dad kept promising would arrive. She returned with empty hands and a sigh. It's the 15th. And we still don't have it, McFarland told her assistant over the tiny voices of children eating generic Cheerios at pint-sized tables. She sat at a front desk piled with estimates for painting the center's weathered exterior, a bill for the printer, a rent check that TLC was paying late for the first time in 16 years, and a computer loaded with figures revealing the hit after hit after hit that McFarland worried might soon force her to close. Running the daycare had never been easy or lucrative. Now the whole situation felt utterly broken. The federal funds that help businesses like TLC stay afloat during the pandemic with grants and pay boosts had expired in 2023, cut off early by Idaho's conservative legislature, but the staff still expected the higher salaries, which around $14 an hour was not close to a living wage. Cost of insurance and supplies like plastic gloves and canned vegetables kept climbing, and parents were struggling even more to afford the care. Things only got worse this summer. The state, facing higher than expected demand and cost, abruptly stopped accepting most new applications in its federally funded child subsidy program for low-income families. Here in Nampa, a heavily agricultural city of about 114,000 west of Boise, half of TLC's family relied on it. So in August, when TLC would usually be welcoming, even waitlisting new kids as school started, it instead had 0 new enrollments. On the busiest days just a few months earlier, 75 children had attended. Now, just 43 did. In September, income was 22% lower than in June. In early October, McFarland let 3 of her 16 teachers go amid fears that the fragile scaffolding beneath TLC might buckle. It feels like the beginning of the end, if I'm being honest, she said. Now I'm about to get into the crux of the leopards eating her face. McFarland describes herself as a conservative, skeptical of handouts. Even so, she was sometimes shocked by Idaho's legislature. The lawmakers seem to view childcare and helping working families afford it as left ideology, she said, despite the presidential campaigns of both Donald Trump and Kamala Harris talking about the need for government solutions. Now, helping working people would have helped her, but she's conservative. She's skeptical of handouts, but she was shocked that they're snatching the handouts, even though this is something that is necessary for working people. And now she had to let go of her workers. This is where politics is personal and personal is politics. Their ideal family is very quote unquote traditional, and it really overlooks the reality of a lot of families' real situations. And to that I say, duh. All right, others have drawn similar conclusions, with a recent study finding that Idaho, which has one of the nation's most restrictive abortion laws, offers the fewest social services for women and children of any state with an abortion ban. So they are very anti-family. They don't like to help people. They don't like social services, but they're going to make women have kids no matter what. Yes, this is very red, and this is very duh. These people are not family oriented. They are, I don't know what they are. All right, let's keep going. Idaho's Republican leaders celebrated when the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade in 2022, though Governor Brad Little did say the ruling meant that the deep red state must confront what we know will be growing needs for women and families. Yet, Idaho backslid, allowing its Maternal Mortality Review Committee to disband and declining to expand postpartum Medicaid coverage before reversing both decisions this year. Amid a child care crisis that is nationwide, with too few spots in some places and steep fees nearly everywhere, it remains one of a handful of states that spend no state dollars on child care. State law bars public schools from spending state money on pre-kindergarten students. So listen to this part. 3 years ago, Idaho won an $18 million federal grant for preschool development. 3 years ago would have still been in the Biden-Harris administration. Little and the state's U.S. senator hailed the news, as did business leaders, citing a U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation report that estimated child care breakdowns were costing Idaho $479 million annually in lost tax revenue and employee absences and turnover. Listen to this. Legislators rejected the grant. Among their concerns that the Idaho Association for the Education of Young Children, the nonprofit chosen to administer it, would teach concepts of social justice, an assertion that the IAEYC denied. They rejected a grant that would have helped them because people keep taking off of work. So it would have helped the whole state. That's how these people are. Politics is personal, and the personal is political. State Representative Charlie Shepard, whose district is in rural northwestern Idaho, also raised a separate issue during the debate. Listen closely to this. Any bill that makes it easier or more convenient for mothers to come out of the home and let somebody else raise their child, I just don't think that's a good direction for us to be going. So if a woman is not attached and shackled to her home, then that's just not a good thing. So he's just outright saying that this is about controlling women. It says he later apologized. Yay. But still, they denied the money. They rejected a grant that would have helped childcare. During the 2024 session, a modest bill was introduced to create an Office of Early Childhood. Its GOP sponsor emphasized that the measure aimed only to integrate existing services to improve families' access. The president of an influential conservative lobbying group, the Idaho Freedom Foundation, countered that the idea dips us into the Communist Manifesto. None of this is within the proper role of government. These services properly belong with families, with markets, with churches, with private volunteer organizations, testified Ronald Nate, a former Republican legislator. While a House committee approved the bill, it never reached the full chamber. For most of her life, McFarland was uninterested in politics, even though politics is personal and personal affects politics. All right. But in the past few years, she had joined the IAEYC board and even met with officials in Boise and lawmakers in Washington to stress the industry's woes. Some sounded sympathetic. Others suggested providers were bad at business or swimming in cash given their $800 a month fees. For TLC, McFarland insisted neither was true, but here she stood at the daycare's front counter, folding cot sheets and towels that she had washed at home because the center's machine was broken. A little girl with blonde braids marched up. "Huggy," the child said. Of course, McFarland responded, cheerily bending to embrace her. "I needed that. How did you know?" McFarland's parents started TLC as an in-home daycare in 2006. Within 2 years, they signed a lease for a vacant produce market. Her father painted the center's sign yellow with a rainbow in his living room. His goal, David Fetzer said, to be one of the best daycares in Nampa. Soon they had a waiting list, and teachers for a long time seemed okay with the pay close to Idaho's $7.25 minimum wage. The location was never ideal. The low-slung building stands against a retaining wall and shares a lot with a big box farm supply store. The carpets are worn and the playground is a small patch under a sunshade. But TLC gained the trust of many families, and McFarland proudly calls it a learning center with weekly lesson themes like apples and transportation and roads. Cameras in the classroom allow parents to watch their kids remotely. COVID turned everything upside down. her insurer stopped covering daycares. Its replacement policy costs far more. To save on printing, McFarland digitized enrollment forms. To save on staffing costs, she changed closing time from 7 p.m. to 6 p.m., thanking families in an email for their patience as we navigate these challenges together. She raised tuition modestly. She worried constantly about retaining her teachers. Even with the increased salaries, some qualify today for Medicaid. Others are able to work only because their kids can attend free. McFarland had so far refused to increase child-to-teacher ratios, which the state recently allowed to address shortages that put 50% of Idahoans in a child care desert. She viewed the change as a compromise on quality. She regularly checks Facebook. Midway through a quiet Tuesday, the scent of lunch's cheesy burger bake wafting from the kitchen, she saw in a private group for childcare providers that some were selling furniture and others their business. In a private group for local moms, some had posted about the Idaho childcare program subsidies. Even with ICCP, I'm still looking at over $1,300 for my kids per month. I literally won't even have that much after bills are paid, one woman said. McFarland, a single mother with a third grader and a teen, understood the anxiety. Most people are surviving off the hope and pray plan right now, she said. She picked up the phone and tried reaching someone who had emailed about a spot for their child. No answer, so she left a message. If you have any questions or you're ready to set up a tour, you can call me. She later made another call, this time to a parent who had recently withdrawn her 3 children after the child care subsidy she depended on did not come through. She owed TLC more than $3,000. As long as I get some payment by the end of the month, I can keep it out of collections, McFarland told her. Hanging up, McFarland turned to Amelia Eccles, her assistant director, to relay that the parent had promised to pay a few $100s a month until her tax return came in the spring. But what she really hoped, the subsidy was resolved and the kids would re-enroll, was not happening. The money was owed by Sandy Letsom, a public high school teacher whose children had attended TLC since 2021. Her 4-year-old is autistic and her 2-year-old has various feeding therapy protocols, and she had found the teachers met their needs better than any daycare she tried. She loved TLC's warmth. Now this right here is wild because this is a teacher. So if they want teachers to be able to have a family and go to work, there needs to be some childcare available. But if they are not paying teachers enough to be able to afford to live and to put their kids in childcare, how is that even going to work? Many of these lawmakers don't think these things through. Her husband works low-wage hourly jobs, and the state subsidy dropped the family's total daycare fee to about $750 monthly. When summer came and Letsom could care for the 2 kids and their 3-year-old sibling, she pulled them out. She brought them back to TLC in August, and she was in the process of again applying for the subsidy when the state announced it would pause new enrollments in 2 days. So this woman has a husband, and you know how that legislator said that they wanted to keep women in the home. Well, what happens when the dad works low-wage hourly jobs and doesn't have enough to support those kids? What is the solution, especially since they don't have social safety net? She missed the deadline. Full-price daycare would now consume more than half of her $2,800 monthly take-home pay, and the other half of my paycheck would maybe be rent, Letsom, 26, explained in mid-October. I would have nothing for gas or groceries. The Idaho Department of Health and Welfare's abrupt change to the program, which at the time reached about 7,800 children, sent shockwaves through the daycare community. I'm making this video over on TikTok. This video is already getting long. I'm going to stop it here and make a part 2. So this is part 2 of this Washington Post article talking about how the state doesn't offer subsidies, how daycare workers are not getting paid enough, how daycare providers can barely pay their bills, and how parents don't have enough to actually pay the daycare providers. It just seems like a cluster F of major proportions in Idaho. So let's continue with part 2. Emily Allen, who had toiled for years in the inhospitable trenches of childcare advocacy at the Capitol, was stunned. A policy associate at Idaho Voices for Children, she saw the early childhood bill that passed through committee in the spring as a paradigm shift. Lawmakers were open to discussing the topic. At the ribbon cutting of a daycare that Micron Technology opened for employees in Boise, the governor identified investments in childcare as critical for drawing workers to Idaho. It's antithetical to all the momentum, Allen said, of the agency's action. It feels punitive, like they don't care about childcare and they're not listening, and they're just walking back everything that was accomplished in the last couple of years. Letsom's husband ended up staying home with their children. Other parents made different calculations and decisions. Kiara Larson works for a cleaning company in nearby Caldwell. Her older children, ages 1 and 3, were at TLC until she switched to a slightly cheaper Nampa daycare. Her baby, born in August, now came with her to the office thanks to a boss helping her save on childcare costs. Look at her holding a baby at work. Listen to this part. Larson also saved by making only $15 an hour. The boss offered more, but the extra money would make her ineligible for the state subsidy, which is based on household income relative to the federal poverty level. So she has to turn down money so she can be eligible for a subsidy. That's where these people are in this state of Idaho. She'd recently lost food stamps because her kid's father, whom she describes as a good dad but an unreliable partner, began paying child support. In a perfect world, I want to be able to take care of me and my kids without any help, Larson, who's 28, said this fall. Early in her last pregnancy, unsure of how she would support a third child, she made an appointment for an abortion in Oregon. She missed the appointment after she couldn't come up with the $700 fee. She felt guilty thinking of that call as she held her cherub she named Kamari, yet life was constant scrimping. Her toddler daughter's princess bed was a donation. Her toddler son's race car bed came from Facebook Marketplace. Her tidy apartment, which rents for $1,000 a month, is in kind of a dicey area where probation officers routinely visit. As a child, she heard Idaho touted as a mom's state. It did not feel like that to her now. It just feels like we're kind of on the back burner, Lawson said. It feels like this push of, we want people to have kids and have families, but they won't offer any support. And that's the part that bugs me. They restrict abortion, but they don't offer any help to mothers. They don't offer any social services. And so it's like, how does this work in reality? And we're seeing right now that their reality is bleak. This woman has to live in a dicey area with 3 young kids under the age of 3 or 4. I can't remember how old her kids were, but 3 young kids, and she's a single mother. The next day, McFarland returned from the mailbox with an envelope. The letter was from the state about one family's subsidy rate. Not the check we need, she told Eccles. It was billing day when McFarland would calculate what families owed, send out invoices, and get a better sense of the month's income. Now I hit my total, she said, clicking on a spreadsheet on her computer and inhaling nervously. A moment later, that's even lower than I thought. The decrease in ICC payments from the state was part of the drop. They had fallen from $15,000 in June to $87.49 in October. That is a dramatic drop. Remember, she does not believe in handouts. So some of this, she should be more involved in politics, but she's conservative, and she's a conservative woman. McFarland was already offering her teachers voluntary time off, and she hated to think that she might have to let more go. Even with low enrollment, there were limits to how low staffing could be. Every day was a juggle to make sure the child-teacher ratios were right, not just for legal reasons, but because bigger classes were a recipe for staff burnout. The classroom for 1-year-old wobblers had a ratio of 6 children to 1 teacher, but often 7 tots were present. That meant 2 teachers were required. On this afternoon, just 5 were there, so lead teacher McKenna Rich was on her own for snack time. The vibe was something like a circus. A bouncy rendition of If You're Happy and You Know It streamed from a speaker. One boy gnawed on a board book. Another ambled in one shoe. Rich, a sunny 25-year-old with a long braid, was changing yet another diaper. My wrists are so sore from changing so many, she said. The next half an hour was a whirlwind. Soft hands, she exhorted one little girl who had just hit a boy with a block. Rich's own daughter was in the preschool classroom, the perk that made it possible for her to work at TLC and save some of her $2,200 a month salary. She and her husband wanted to buy a house, but prices are crazy. Out front, McFarland was talking with a young man in a baseball cap, the dad whose $1,199 tuition check she'd been expecting earlier in the week. It was supposed to have been sent by his employer, an increasingly common arrangement in a market where workers are in demand. I feel terrible, he said. His toddler was new to TLC and she wanted to be understanding, but if she didn't have the money in 5 days, she said, the boy couldn't stay. McFarland soon got diverted by a text from a veteran teacher who was 8 months pregnant and suddenly in the hospital because of high blood pressure. Maybe there was a way for the center to make do on fewer staff hours, she wondered. She had other ideas too, and she floated them by her father when he stopped by the next day to pick up her 15-year-old son to go hunting. Fetzer wore a camo jacket and a baseball cap that read, We the People. She first told him about the payment arrangement with Letsum. That's reasonable, he said. And what about opening half an hour later to save on salaries? Sure, why not, he agreed. Fetzer still controlled TLC's finances, but he had long relied on his daughter to run things. They had a mutual goal when they started improving the daycare every month. Now it felt like they were always cutting. On the wall calendar behind McFarland, payday was written in green. 4 days from now, she would learn whether TLC had enough money to cover wages without Fetzer dipping into savings. He felt fairly confident they could make it to spring and what's often an enrollment bump. His daughter wasn't so sure. Much hinged on whether Idaho's subsidy program resumed and in what form. A few weeks later, officials announced a lower pre-pandemic poverty rate for the subsidies. We have some families that maybe barely are at that threshold, McFarland said. It's going to drop them off the program completely. At least the state would be restarting new enrollments in January. It was a bit of good news, but hardly enough to guarantee TLC's future. I wonder how her dad voted. I really wonder how her dad voted, because this woman is seeing the day-to-day because she's involved in the day-to-day. But like these men who are making these laws don't see how hard women have to make this work. I wanted to read this because you see very clearly how women have to juggle so much. You can see how much McFarland was juggling, texting, talking about the teacher ratios. She got a pregnant teacher. She had, these kids that are bouncing all over the place. Can you take in one more kid? So she is there with the day-to-day and all of the circus that's going on. But these men are just like, let's cut this and this. Let's cut this money because we need women to stay in the home. Well, what happens when daddy ain't making enough money to care for these kids? You want these people to have more and more kids, but you still have to feed them. You still have to turn on the heat. You still need to pay the rent. So how does that work in reality? All right, I know that this was a long article, but it needed to be said. And this is one of the reasons why red states can act like they are pro-life and pro-family and all of that. But when you don't think about cost, and it does cost to have kids, you're really stressing people, typically mothers, out. Join the conversation. Let me know what you think about all of this. Don't forget to like, comment, and share.